strikes, potential blackouts and a plunging currency. Just how has Britain managed to slip into a recession? The UK economy shrank by 0.3% in August, potentially beginning what economists expect will be a lengthy recession through the winter. Postal workers, rail workers and public barristers have all carried out strikes in recent months in protest over pay and conditions, as wages failed to keep up with inflation running at around 10%. A worst-case scenario laid out by National Electricity System Operator the National Grid warned that households and businesses may face 3-hour power outages over winter. Pensioners protest over rising fuel prices at a demonstration outside Downing Street called by the National Pensioners Convention and Fuel Poverty Action on February 7, 2022 in London. The Bank of England this week added to its emergency rescue package for British pension funds while the government brought forward its medium-term fiscal policy plan, having plunged the markets into chaos with its widely criticised announcements last month. A number of pension funds were hours from collapse when the central bank intervened on September 28, and policymakers continue to battle against market volatility with further expansions of the bond buying scheme last Monday and Tuesday. The spike in interest rate expectations following new Finance Minister Kwasi Kwarteng's so-called mini-budget also caused mayhem in the mortgage market, leading banks to withdraw products and rates to surge for prospective homeowners. Meanwhile, the British pound fell to an all-time low against the dollar in the aftermath of Kwarteng's policy announcements, only regaining some ground when the government U-turned on some of its most radical policies, such as the abolition of the top rate of tax for the country's highest earners. Kwarteng on Monday announced that his scheduled expansion on last month's controversial fiscal plans and an independent assessment of their impact from the Office for Budget Responsibility would be brought forward by 3 weeks to October 31, as the Treasury and the Bank of England look to temper market concerns and restore credibility. The same day, the central bank is expected to begin selling gilts, UK sovereign bonds, as part of its delayed quantitative tightening efforts as it unwinds pandemic-era monetary stimulus in the hope of tackling runaway inflation. Economists expect further volatility in the bond market and payroll for pension funds in the coming weeks ahead of the full budget statement, while the Bank of England continues to walk a tightrope between ensuring fiscal stability and reining in inflation. The UK is the only G7 economy not to have reattained its pre-pandemic GDP level by the second quarter of 2022. The UK economy shrank by 0.3% in August, potentially beginning what economists expect will be a lengthy recession throughout the winter. GDP was only just returning to its pre-pandemic level, highlighting the challenge facing Prime Minister Liz Truss's growth agenda. The recently resigned Prime Minister has committed to a radical overhaul of the country's economic policy, vowing to address anemic growth over the past decade or more, despite her party having been in power since 2010. But the UK government's U-turn on tax cut won't placate markets. The government's growth plan must also overcome the impact of Brexit, which most economists project will reduce real per capita GDP. The government's Independent Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, calculated that Brexit would reduce the UK's potential productivity by 4% over the long term, while it is projected that the UK will have the lowest growth in the G20 in 2023, apart from heavily sanctioned Russia. Real GDP is likely to retreat again in September in line with double-digit inflation, eroding household purchasing power and the resulting output loss from additional bank holiday to coincide with Queen Elizabeth's funeral on Monday the 19th of September. Queen Elizabeth II, the world's longest reigning monarch, died on September 8 after 70 years on the throne, ushering in 10 days of national mourning and a public holiday on the day of her funeral. We now believe the recession in the UK has begun, in the third quarter of 2022 and will likely last for 3 quarters. Our near-term GDP outlook anticipates a recession spilling into 2023 because of a tight and prolonged squeeze on household budget fueling a consumer-led recession. The economy is also expected to contract over the full year of 2023, despite substantial fiscal stimulus such as the government's energy price guarantee and income tax cuts, due to rising household borrowing costs, softer demand in critical export markets and persistent volatility in financial markets. The latest labour market statistics showed UK unemployment falling to 3.5%, its lowest rate since 1974, fueled by a rise in the inactivity rate, which now stands at 21.7%. From June to August, annual growth in average total pay, including bonuses, for employees was 6%, while growth in regular pay, excluding bonuses, was 5.4%. Representing a real terms decline of 2.4% and 2.9%, respectively. UK inflation slipped slightly to 9.9% in August, with soaring food and energy prices having driven annual consumer price inflation to a 40-year high of 10.1% the previous month, but economists expect it to rise through the remainder of the year. Prime Minister Liz Truss, who recently resigned after only 45 days in office, was also coming under pressure from lawmakers in her own party to guarantee an increase to welfare benefits in line with inflation, with reports suggesting she could opt for raising them, in line with earnings instead, heaping further pain on the country's lowest-income households. New research found that 22% of UK adults said they were having sleepless nights over market volatility, soaring inflation and the rising cost of living, while 1 in 10 said they had experienced panic attacks. The cost of living crisis is having a detrimental effect on individuals, not only financially, but physically and mentally too. Widespread strikes, postal workers, rail workers, journalists and public barristers have all carried out strikes in recent months in protest over pay and conditions, as wages failed to keep up with inflation running at around 10%. Rail strikes carried out by members of the RMT union, in protest over pay and conditions, have brought the country to a standstill on multiple days throughout the summer and into fall. Members of the CWU, Communication Workers Union, also continue to strike, including 115,000 postal employees of former state monopoly Royal Mail. It was reported Friday that CWU representatives had entered into talks with Royal Mail executives, but 19 days of further postal strikes are still set to go ahead in the run-up to the festive period unless substantial progress is made in the coming days. Meanwhile, the Royal College of Nursing, RCN, is currently holding its first industrial action ballot in its 106-year history for 300,000 members, demanding a pay rise in line with inflation. The reality is the UK is a low-growth economy in the present day and age. Waiting times for access to the country's National Health Service are at an all-time high, with public hospitals beset by staff shortages and a lack of beds. Junior doctors were excluded from the 4.5% NHS uplift, with the government instead imposing an increase of just 2%, which the BMA said is derisory in the face of the ongoing cost of living crisis and in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Rising living, food, and gas expenses, the direct result of inflation, are beginning to be felt more and more. With so many occurrences, the question still remains: will we begin to see the unraveling of other global economies as well, or will there be a recovery anytime soon?